Hey, y'all. Welcome to the Cosmic Time of the Week. I'm Bill, the accidental physicist,
And I'm Amy, the incidental psychologist.
and it's Tuesday after lunch.
So, last time you promised me pizza,
I did promise you pizza.
and you said, and I wrote this down, that pizza is an amazing metaphor for life, the universe, and everything, and especially the fact that everything is exact without being exactly precise. And then we ran out of time.
Well, I've been thinking about it all week, and I think pizza might be the most honest food that exists.
Why is that? Can you explain that?
Well, okay, have you ever seen a perfect pizza?
I I would say I've seen pizza that are called perfect.
But were they precise? Was the sauce exactly evenly distributed? Was every pepperoni the same distance from every other pepperoni? Was the crust the same thickness all the way around?
No, obviously not.
But it was still exactly what you wanted.
Exactly what I wanted, yes.
That's the whole episode right there. Nothing important in life is exact without being exactly precise. And the people who are good at life, good at work, good at relationships, good at making pizza, they're not the ones who eliminated all the imperfections. They're the ones who learned how to aim them.
Okay, so let's unpack that. What do you mean by aim when you're talking about imperfections?
So I'll tell you a thing about pizza makers. A good pizza maker knows their oven. They know it runs hot in the back left corner, for example. They know the stone has a cool spot near the door. They don't fix the oven, they rotate the pizza. They put the thicker side of the dough toward the hot spot. They compensate not by making the oven perfect, but by understanding exactly how it's imperfect and actually preparing the pizza to work well with that.
So the pizza isn't good despite the imperfections.
Correct. It's good because the imperfections are accounted for and aimed at each other. The thick crust goes toward the hot spot. The thin sauce stays near the cool spot. Neither one is right on its own, but together you get an even bake, and it probably satisfies the people at the table better because some people want thinner crust and less sauce, and some want thicker and more sauce.
There's actually a word in psychology for that. Actually, it's more of a concept. It's called satisfying. So, my uncle, he's in the 50s, or he was famous in the 50s, Herbert Simon. He said that choosing an option that is good enough rather than hunting for the optimal one is what satisfying means. And this whole argument about satisfaction isn't about being lazy, it's about what rational people do when they understand that perfection costs more than it's worth.
Yeah, I'm saying something slightly different, though. I'm not saying settle for good enough. I'm saying if you understand the shape of your mistakes, you can point them at each other and get something better than either one alone.
I guess I'm going to need a non pizza example for that.
Okay, when I was at Canonical, I wrote documentation for a living. And here's what I learned. My first draft always has a lot of energy, but it's sloppy. Ideas everywhere, half of them redundant. My second draft always has precision, but it's dead. All the life edited out. Well, neither draft is actually right. But if I know that, and I do after 30 years, I can take the energy from one draft and the structure from draft two and combine what survives each pass.
So you're not trying to write a perfect first draft or the second draft.
Right. I'm writing two imperfect drafts that fail in predictable and opposite, that is, complementary ways. And then I let the failures cancel each other out.
I also have seen something similar in therapy. Well, I wouldn't even call it therapy, but people who got their relationship problems together. One of the things that I found is that couples who do well are the ones who never fight. They're the ones who fight, but they fight in complementary directions. One person runs hot, the other runs cold. One overreacts, the other underreacts. And if they know that about themselves, both of them are self aware of these actions, they can factor it out. And I know I overreact about 30% of the time, and I know you underreact about the same amount of percentage most of the time. So the truth is, somewhere in between, we both know it.
That's exactly it. I know a couple who've been married 42 years. And when they first got married, the wife, from her family upbringing, had a habit of you always stay in the room until the argument's finished. The husband had this rule where if somebody raises their voice, you leave the room. And they worked it out by saying, okay, we're going to stay in the room, except that if you get overwhelmed, husband, you can leave and we can finish it later. And the wife said, I won't raise my voice. So you just described that principle in human terms.
What about in physics terms?
Well, it doesn't have a good name in physics. It's got some odd names in like audio and noise canceling and things like that. So I just call it destructive interference of imprecisions.
Wow, that sounds very new. What is it?
It's a wave mechanics thing. When two waves hit the same point with the same size but opposite direction, they cancel, flatline. The waves don't disappear, they're still there. But at that point, their effects erase each other. Same thing with imprecisions. If you understand their shape, you can time them so they cancel.
But how is this different from averaging?
So averaging assumes your errors are random. This only works when they're structured, when you know why they're wrong and in which direction. Random errors pile up. Structured errors you understand, can be aimed and compensated for.
So, give me more everyday examples because I think people are doing this constantly without realizing it.
They are. Here's one. You're driving somewhere you've never been. Your GPS says it's a 45-minute drive. You know from experience that GPS is always about 10% optimistic. It doesn't account for your neighborhood stop signs or the fact that you don't drive like a maniac. So you tell your friend you'll be there in 50 minutes. You just did destructive interference. You took the GPS imprecision and offset it with your own calibrated error.
I'm really bad at GPS and estimations, but I think the reason that works is because you understand the structure of the GPS error. It's not randomly wrong. It's constantly optimistic, so you can correct it.
Right. Now here's one that doesn't work. Your friend asks you how long a home renovation will take. You have no idea. Your contractor has no idea. You talk about it, you both guess, and you average your guesses. That's not destructive interference. That's two people being randomly wrong in the same direction because they talked about it. And now they end up just as wrong, but more confident about how right they are.
Right. So in psychology, we call that shared information bias. So groups tend to discuss and reinforce information everyone already has rather than surfacing unique knowledge. So averaging the guesses just amplifies whatever systematic error is already baked in.
Renovation always takes longer.
Yes, renovation always takes longer, and that's the practical law of nature.
But well, here's a case where it works in a different way at cooking. So my wife Sharon is a much better cook than I am, but I'm a better measurer. She
Hmm.
eyeballs everything and it comes out great because she's got 30 plus years of calibration in her hands. I follow the recipe and it comes out fine. Correct, but fine.
Fine. So she's imprecise but accurate, and you're precise but sometimes missing the point.
Exactly. And when we cook together, and this is rare because one cook in the kitchen is way too much, the food is better than either of us alone because her feel compensates for my rigidity, and my rigidity catches the little places where her field drifts. So the imprecisions
Hmm.
cancel and we get better food.
You know what that reminds me of? There's a study, and I think it was Sherwowski who popularized it, and It's called the jelly beans in a jar. So when you ask the crowd to guess how many jelly beans are in a jar, and then the average of all guesses usually would come closer to the right answer than the individual guess.
The wisdom of crowds.
I guess that's right. But here's the part where people miss. It only works when the error or all errors are when the errors are independent. So when everyone's guessing based on their own perception, the over guesses and under guesses cancel out. But the moment people start talking to each other, and then the moment the errors become correlated in the same direction, the crowd gets dumber. Not smarter, dumber, and that's basically social media.
And that's the rubble pile from the last episode. Or as my middle child says, when people are individuals, they're smart. When they're in a crowd, they're stupid.
And we're all coming back to this full circle. Weak forces get everyone drifting the same direction, and now your errors don't cancel anymore. They compound instead.
So the condition for this to work in pizza, writing, relationships, crowds, is that you need errors are structured but independent. This is why the number one rule of interrogating suspects is never let them talk beforehand. You want the same type of mistake, but in opposite directions. That's when they cancel and you get something that's closer to the truth.
So here's where I want to push on the psychology side, because what you're describing is essentially the opposite of perfectionism. And perfectionism is an epidemic right now.
Oh, really? How so?
So when people talk about perfectionism, they think about eliminating the errors, find the right answers, get it exactly right. And we know from research that perfectionism doesn't lead to better outcomes. It leads to paralysis, anxiety, and paradoxically more mistakes. Because perfectionists are so focused on eliminating errors that they can't use the information the errors are trying to give them.
That's the fantasy I talk about in engineering. Classical engineering starts from the same place. Eliminate the error, better components, tighter tolerances. And it works up to a point, but every physical system has a floor. There's a level of imprecision you simply cannot remove. The noise of the universe in radiostatic, thermal noise, component mismatch, the fact that no two transistors will ever be exactly alike.
And I guess the engineers who made the biggest breakthroughs weren't the ones who push the floor lower. They were the ones who asked questions like, okay, the floor is here. I can't move it, but I can build the system around where the noise cancel itself, I guess.
That's exactly what happened with precision amplifiers in the 70s and 80s. The components couldn't get better, so the engineers designed better circuits where the amplifier's own error was measured and then subtracted from the output. So the amplifier actually canceled its own imperfection, not by being better, but by being strategic about where the imperfection ended up.
And this maps directly onto what I see in effective people versus perfectionist people. The effective ones, they know they're biased. They know that they overreact on Mondays and maybe get sloppy after lunch or favor ideas that sound clever over ideas that are practical. So what they do is they would build correction into their process. They get second opinions, they try to sleep on it, they have a trusted colleague who sees differently, and these are all forms of uh,
Retro rockets from
yes,
the last episode.
retro rockets. Your retro rockets aren't perfect. They're structured corrections. They're the things that you've set up in advance to counteract the drift, and you know that you're going to have.
Right. Retro rockets are tied to measurement tools like inertial guidance or compass or whatever, and they fire when they see an error. The perfectionist doesn't have retro rockets because they don't believe in error.
And that's exactly the trap. The person who says, I'm going to get it right the first time, is usually the person with no correction mechanism, no second draft, no trusted dissenter, no way for their errors to be canceled because they don't believe they have errors.
Distrust all claims for the one true way.
That's what it is. That's the first principle in the Unix principle. And this is why it works, because if you believe there's only one true way, one right answer, one perfect approach, you have no reason to build in corrections. And without corrections, your imprecisions aren't aimed at each other. They just piled up instead.
Like a rubble pile.
Like a rubble pile with no retro rockets and no pizza.
So I'm going to tell you about a woman named Maria. She's a character in the book I'm working on.
Is that the Tuesday after lunch book?
Right. Maria Dominguez, she lives in New Orleans. She's got a house full of people showing up for Thanksgiving. Half of them don't get along. And she's trying to cook a meal for 18 people in a dining room that's built for 14.
That sounds like she's running a space mission.
She is running a space mission. And here's the thing. Luckily, Maria is not a perfectionist. She's a satisficer, to use your word. But she's a strategic satisficer. She knows her oven runs hot. She knows her mother-in-law is going to criticize whatever she makes. She knows Uncle Ray is going to show up an hour early and her sister's going to show up an hour late. And none of those things are under her control.
So what does she do?
She aims for them. She puts the casserole that needs more heat on the top rack and the one that needs less on the bottom. That's got the oven's hotspot working for her instead of against her. She gives her mother-in-law a job, something visible, because she knows that the criticism comes from feeling useless, not from the food actually being bad. She tells Uncle Ray to come a different time and her sister too, so they both show up at the right time. She's already factored in that one's going to be early, tells them to come later. One's going to be late, tells them to come early.
So that sounds like someone who's really good at prioritizing. She's not eliminating the problems, she's pointing them at each other.
Exactly. The meal comes out right. Not perfect, right. The turkey might be a little dry, but the gravy's a little extra, so it balances. The sweet potatoes are always over-seasoned, but they're next to the perennially bland green beans, so the plate works. Nothing on that table would win a competition, but the dinner, the whole system, is exactly what everyone needed.
And that's what I would quote destructive interference of imprecisions at a dinner table.
And Maria doesn't know that phrase. She'd look at you funny if you said it. But she knows the principle in her bones. She knows you can't control everything. She knows every component's going to be a little off. And she knows that if you understand which way each thing is off, you can arrange them so the offs cancel out.
Actually, there's a name for this in psychology too. And if I remember correctly, it's called compensatory control. So when people feel like they can't control the big things, the effective ones usually find small strategic points of control that offsets chaos. And it's not about controlling everything, it's more about knowing where to push.
And the ones who try to control everything
Burn the turkey and yell at Uncle Ray.
every time. So let me tie this back to where we started. Last episode, we said, distrust all claims for the one true way. And now I think we can say why.
Why?
Well, because truth doesn't come from a single precise source. It comes from multiple precise sources whose errors have been aimed at each other. The first draft and the second draft, the overcorrecting spouse and the undercorrecting spouse, the GPS estimate and your personal offset. You need at least 2 imprecisions to get anything closer to the truth. One way is always wrong. 2 ways properly aimed are usually close enough. Sometimes you need a third way.
And I guess when you say close enough, it isn't about a compromise. It's the best anyone can actually do. The universe doesn't deal in perfection. It deals in, what's your phrase again? Exact without being exactly precise.
Exactly. Exact without being exactly precise. The pizza is what you wanted, even though it's not precisely made. The Thanksgiving dinner is exactly what everyone needed, even though nothing on the table is precisely right.
And that's why the first principle works. If you insist on that one true way, you're insisting on a single imperfection. You've got nothing to cancel it with, but if you hold two imprecisions, two perspectives, or two approaches, or two drafts, you got the raw material for something real.
Distrust all claims for the one true way, because the true way is always at least two.
What about 3 or 4 or 5?
Oh, you could do that too.
That might be the tagline for this whole show.
Better than the cosmic time of the week.
Actually, nothing is better than the cosmic time of the week, but it's close enough. So, to bring it back, we're all making imprecise pizzas every day. Every decision, every conversation, every plan. And the idea isn't to make it perfect. It's to understand which direction you're off and find a thing that's off in the other direction.
Your first and second drafts, your instinct and your second opinion, your gut and your spouse's gut.
I have a question. What about if you have a third and a fourth and a fifth opinion? Is that gonna impact your imprecision even more? Or is that
Well,
gonna make it more correct?
so in science, you do something called a linear regression, and the more data points you get, the more accurate it's considered to be. But there's a limit to that. There's a German proverb: a man with one watch knows what time it is. A man with two watches is never sure. And that speaks to the fact that the man with one watch just goes with what's there. He might be a little bit late, but if his watch is wrong, he'll correct it later. A man with two or three watches, trying to average all these times, one of them is probably going to be right, and the other two or three or four are going to be wrong.
And if you can do that, if you can hold two watches or two flawed things or more and let them correct each other, you get something closer to truth than either one could reach alone, I guess.
Yes, close enough is the best anyone gets. But of course, there's a stop loss when you get too many data points and you get into analysis paralysis, where you can't find close enough because you can't ever stop searching. That's going a little off the mark. But two or three sources, good checking, that's close enough is better than most people think.
Should we leave that for next time?
Yeah, next time we should probably talk about what happens when people get this wrong on purpose. When imprecisions are manufactured and aimed, not at each other, but at you. I think it's called social media. That's a whole different kind of physics. And the solution is simple. It's actually keep it simple, stupid.
It sounds like a propaganda and manipulation at the same time.
It sounds like a Tuesday to me
After lunch.
after lunch.